I'm buying a new bike and I don't know what to get. I just don't know what to get. It's crazy. I don't know what I should get. Full suspension. Hardtail. No, really, full suspension. It's all about the hardtail. Yeah, full suspension. Yeah. Hardtails are cool. They're all the trend. Hello. Welcome to Shad Life, where I have 40 years of BMX and mountain biking knowledge, and I like to share it with you awesome people. Today, we're going to talk about what kind of bike should you get. Should you get a hardtail or a full suspension? Well, that's what this video is about. And am I really going to give you the right answer? Probably not. But what I am going to give you is some criteria on which to help make a decision based on the kind of terrain you'll be riding, the skill level of rider that you are, and really what are you going to be doing on the bike? Well, what type of style of riding are you going to be doing? So let's put that criteria together, and then we can come up with what would be the best bike for you. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the bike industry. We have this gigantic bike industry with massive marketing departments that their goal is to sell product. And how do they sell product? Well, most of the time they use hype. And probably over the last 5 years, it's gotten kind of crazy, but almost every time that I see a bike company promoting their product, they have A, really experienced riders, B, they're airing it out, they're doing jumps, 3, they're riding really gnarly terrain, and they're super smooth in skill and hanging out manuals and all this stuff, and they throw some really cool music to it and all of that. And you watch the video and it gets you all pumped and hyped on mountain biking and so on and so forth. But let's get real, right? Let's get real. Is that what you are going to be doing on your bike? Are you going to be just ripping down the sides of mountains, hitting big, massive gap jumps and laying out big old whips and all that stuff? I mean, if that's your thing and you're doing that, by all means, you want a bike that can do that stuff. But I'm going to bet that probably 80% of you, if not more, really just want to ride some single track and enjoy being outdoors and pedaling around, and you want the bike to A, function, B, be comfortable, 3, be capable of riding the terrain that you're going to be on, and so on and so forth, right? And then you have this thing of how much can you afford? You know, not everybody's like me and can sit here and just buy new bikes every year or couple of years and have multiple bikes and have a bunch of bikes hanging on the wall. I'm fortunate in that instance that I can afford to do that, but not everybody can. A lot of people, you know, they don't make as much money, or they have families with kids, so they have to like accommodate that, you know, so on and so forth. There's reasons why a large amount of people out there can't just sit there and be like, I'm gonna have my man garage or whatever, right? And because of that, let's just pretend you can only buy one bike, you can only afford one bike, and you want it to do what's best for you. And so let's get into details of how you can make that decision. Okay, so here's my hardtail. When I bought this bike stock, it's mostly stock. I did put the carbon wheels on it. There's a video about that, so on and so forth. But this bike, believe it or not, especially modern hardtails with the more modern geometry, will satisfy 80% of you out there. Believe it. Yes. This bike is plenty capable of riding pretty much all mountain bike trails, even some of the more technical stuff, as long as your skills are up to the task, right? So I'm gonna link up in this corner here a channel I watch a lot called Hardtail Party. Yeah, I'm plugging his channel. He didn't tell me I should plug his channel, nor do I get any money for it, but I watch that channel a lot and listen to what he says. Watch the kind of terrain he rides on hardtails. He's in Sedona, Arizona, riding up gnarly rocks, down gnarly rock stuff, pretty gnarly terrain. He does like a bit more aggressive of a bike for good reason, because of where he's riding, than I prefer. And that's a little bit of a thing I'm going to talk about, of how aggressive of a bike do you need depending on the type of terrain you're riding. So a hardtail will satisfy you, and the best thing about hardtails is you can get a lot of bike for a lot less money than you can a full suspension bike. This bike, when I bought it new, was around $1,500 or $1,600. It came with XT cranks, SLX shifters. It's a Dior rear derailleur, which is pretty decent, but you know, not top of the line by any means. It came with a dropper post. Out of the box, this bike was awesome. And there's things I haven't changed on it. I like the brakes. The brakes are great. The shifters, the derailleur, the gears, it all works. The cranks, same cranks. Love them. The only thing I've changed out are the carbon wheels, because I'm trying this out, but I kept the stock wheels because I still like the stock wheels. And the carbon wheel thing is for me to do racing and some events with, and I want that little bit of edge on it, and I'm testing them out to see if they hold up and so on and so forth. The dropper on here, stock. Haven't changed a thing. Very impressive bike for that kind of money. I love it. And so even the suspension, Fox now owns Bomber, and so this fork actually has Fox internals on it. So it might not be as fancy as the Fox forks on the outside, but internally it feels nice and plush. It's got great ramp up. I actually put some volume spacers in here to fine tune it to my liking. I mean, super nice fork. So when it comes to money, if you're not like bombing down the sides of mountains, lift access, riding places like Whistler, things like that, out on the North Shore on some gnarly downhills, out in, like I was a couple of years ago, Trestle Bike Park. If you're not doing that kind of stuff and you're riding even a place like Bentonville, like this bike would shine at Bentonville, and up here in Minnesota where we have all the local Twin Cities Metro trails, this bike can ride pretty much anything. And up in Cuyuna even, it can ride 98% of the trails. There's a few exceptions where I'd probably want my full suspension bike, and that's on some of the more gnarly trails that they've built recently. But I could ride pretty much all of Cuyuna on this bike. Love it. I was riding Tioga with this bike. Some technical stuff up there. Love it, love it, love it. So you can ride a hardtail. Don't let the marketing and the bike industry tell you you can't. And you can save a lot of money by going this route, right? Now, let's talk about if you do decide to go full suspension, what kind of bike do you need in that realm? Voila, full suspension. I love this bike, and it serves a lot of the same purposes as my hardtail serves. It just really depends on the mood that I'm in, really, or if I'm gonna really want to ride some more gnarly trails, and so on and so forth. So this is my primary bike. If I'm gonna go travel, I'll be going down to Bentonville here soon. If I was to go out west, here in the United States, out west is the Rocky Mountains, if you don't know that, or something like that, I'm going to want this bike. I'm going to want the full suspension, just for that little extra plushness or security. This has a 150 fork, a 130 rear. This isn't quite an enduro bike. Actually, what I really like about the Rustler, believe it or not, is that it's kind of that in between. It's like a little bit more than a trail bike and not quite an enduro bike. It fits right in between there, which is perfect for my style of riding, which is I like to get up and throw the bike around. I like to air it out, things like that. And I actually know the people involved in designing this bike, both coming from, you know, free ride, downhill, BMX backgrounds, right? So it really fits my needs really well, and I really hope Salsa keeps making these, because if they don't, I'll be a little disappointed. Anyway, so how much full suspension do you need if you decide to go this route? Well, there's lots of different categories. There's the XC, which is going to have like 100 millimeters of suspension travel, maybe 110. Then there's downcountry, which is like the next level up between XC and trail bike. Then there's trail bike. Trail bike is going to generally get up into the 130 to in this case 150, 130, 140, 150 range. And then rear is usually anywhere from 10 millimeters less or the same as the front. And then you start getting into enduro. I would say either 150, 160 and up, 170 maybe even. You start getting into 170, 180, now you're talking a park bike. And if you don't know what a park bike is, think of like Trestle Bike Park or Whistler Bike Park, places like that where you want that big travel and you can hit those gnarly, just rocky downhill descents and things like that. So you're getting into the quite a selection or options of full suspension bikes. What I recommend is, we're kind of going back to talking about this. Like I said, 80% of you could ride a hardtail, right? Same being said here, you could get away with a downcountry or trail bike. Downcountries are kind of rare. They're not super common. If you want something really light but still like cross-country-ish, a downcountry bike is great. I don't recommend most people get into the cross-country realm of things, because those bikes are very performance-oriented for speed and for racing, and they're going to give you that leaned-over thing that I've talked about in some of my previous videos that you don't really ideally want for bike control and comfort. So I would really probably tell most people they should get into the trail bike category. And when we start getting into the enduro category, now you're talking a bike that has a lot more capability than most people need. By all means, if you're hucking it, you're hitting the big rocks and you're doing that kind of stuff, and most of the riding you're doing is downhill focused, an enduro bike is perfect. But if you're somebody that's pedaling around and you're riding, especially like I think of here in Minnesota, we have a trail called Theodore Worth. I have some videos with that. That's pretty tight and twisty single track. And when I had my Ripmo AF, that was not a very fun bike to ride on that terrain. My low side was more fun to ride in that terrain than the Ripmo AF, and the low side's a fully rigid single speed. So that says something. This bike, on the other hand, I love riding at Theodore Worth, and my hardtail I like even more, believe it or not. I'd rather ride my hardtail at Theodore Worth than my full suspension, because I don't really need the suspension, even though both bikes ride very similar because their size and fit to me and their geometry is pretty close. This bike is just a little too much bike for a lot of trail that I ride. So Cuyuna, smooth, everything's flow trail, things like that, and occasionally they put features in that are drops and things like that. This bike handles all that stuff fine. I can do big drops with this thing, no problem. 130 millimeters, Fox suspension. It ramps up pretty quickly. Perfect for doing drops and stuff. So don't get into this mindset that you have to have an enduro bike unless you're really going to be using it. I really will steer most people towards getting a trail bike, 130, 140, 150. That's all you need at the most for travel, for almost everything. And you might not even need that much for most of the trails that you're riding. So that's basically all I wanted to cover here. I am going to do a video on the geometry because and I'm going to just say it now. The bike industry has gotten into this trend and it's driving me nuts to just keep getting slacker and slacker and slacker and super slack and whatever. And I've said it before in some of these bike setup videos. When you start getting really slack, that's if you're going 25 miles per hour or more most of the time, 30 miles per hour, you're bombing downhill. That's when that stability really kicks in. Any speeds lower than that, the bike becomes really sluggish and not as fun to steer. You start getting into I'd say the most common speeds that I'm riding are between 5 and 12 to 15 miles per hour most of the time. And then there's the occasional flowy downhill section where I might get over 20 miles per hour or something like that. 66, 67, 68, that's what I call the sweet spot in head tube angles, is perfect with the modern wider bars. You have plenty of control over your bike. You do not need a super massively slack bike unless you're doing that fast downhill, really gnarly stuff, right? Downhill bikes, park bikes. I almost wish enduro bikes, fine. You know, the whole idea behind enduro racing is you get to the top and you do the downhill stuff. But then even some enduro bikes, I feel like they're getting too slack, and trail bikes absolutely do not need to be slack at all. 66 is probably the slackest I would recommend you go in that realm. 65 is absolutely the limit. You could get away with it, but even to me, that Ripmo AF I had at 65, it felt too sluggish. So there you go. I talked a bit about head angle, even though I said I wasn't, but it's a pet peeve of mine because the bike industry keeps going into the slack trend. And hardtails are the exact same thing with that whole head angle thing. So pay attention to that. It's an important thing. You don't want this big, long, slack bike cruising around at your local single track where you're having to pedal and turn tight turns and all this stuff like that. It's just not going to be a fun bike to ride. Cool. There you have it. If you have any questions about this kind of stuff, feel free to comment in the comments down below. If you want to watch more of these videos, click the subscribe button. But I want to interact with you, and I do it for free. I'm not trying to make money off of my channel. I like doing this, and you can just ask questions in the comments. I can give you advice, and other people have the ability to chime in. There's also the community tab. If you go to my main page on my channel, there's different tabs. Community is one of them. There's a place to chat there. Ask questions, you know, and also give feedback or, you know, your side of these stories or your opinions on them. It's cool. Awesome. I really appreciate your support from my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace. I really like my hardtail. I do. Maybe it's the BMXer in me, but I love that bike. It's so simple. Every time I put power down, it just goes right to the rear wheel. Snap, 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 go. I love that bike. Now you know the truth.